Hello, this is Art coming at you today with a chess puzzle. This is not an easy chess puzzle. Try to take 1 to 5 minutes and figure out what the best moves are for white, and then come back and hear how I solve this puzzle. Hopefully you figured it out. The first thing that I look at in a puzzle like this is I pretend like I don't know there's a tactic and just look at the situation. Materially, we're pretty close to even here. Now, there's some things going on, though, that are really important to notice. First, the queen is kind of lacking in space. There are a lot of squares that are taken away by the rook and the king. So the black queen has very, very limited space. Additionally, the black king is sitting in the center of the board and can be attacked by the rook and kicked around. The next thing is that the knight is centrally located and has a giant number of squares that the knight can go to. And both the king and the queen are on squares of the same color as the knight, which means that when the knight moves, the knight could possibly attack both of those pieces. Unfortunately, the rook is sitting on the ideal square where you want to make that attack happen. One of the reasons this puzzle is so interesting to me, and that I have this video on it, is that one of the first things I do is give students an exercise called Around the World that teaches them how to use knights effectively and how to memorize the patterns that go with knights. For amateurs, missing knight moves is one of the biggest ways to lose game. I'll come back to that exercise in a future video, but it's really important that you learn how to effectively use your knights. The next thing that I notice in this puzzle is that the squares around the king are extremely limited. The king is sitting there on d6, and almost every square is either black and could potentially end up getting forked by the knight, or is controlled currently by the knight. Both c6 and e6 are controlled by the knight, which means that kicking the king around gives the king very limited spaces to be able to go to. In calculating this, the first thing I look at is checks, then captures, then forcing moves. I start with the most powerful piece first, so queens, then rooks, then knights and bishops, then pawns. In this situation, the rook move gets us in the right direction right away. Moving the rook to d5 forces the king to move either to e7 or to c7. c7 results in a very quick knight check and pick up the queen, giving you a completely won endgame. The more complicated situation is king over at this point to e7. Let's look at that fork for a second that I just mentioned. You've got it right here. This is one of those key patterns to know, because you could just grab the king or the queen. King's got to move out of the way. Now, the more interesting one here is when the king escapes to e7, what do we do? And this is where calculation starts to get difficult. Don't move the pieces around on the board, just try to do it in your head here. After the king has moved to e7, we have to try to get the queen onto a square where she is going to be forked, and we end up ahead a minor piece or a rook. In this situation, the move is rook to a5. And this is just a beautiful move here. The queen is basically out of good squares. If the queen escapes to d6, we've got a nice fork over here on f5. If the queen tries to hit either of the other two squares on this diagonal, she just gets taken. All of the squares along the A file are controlled by the rook, except for A5, which we'll come back to. And the three that she can go to on the B file are all controlled either by the king, the pawn, or the knight. So this looks to be safe at first, but then the knight jumps in here to C6, creating this very beautiful fork on the king and the queen. The king moves, the knight picks up the queen, and we've got an easily won endgame here. Even if black grabs this pawn, the pawn here is falling, and we'll easily be able to exchange the knight for the running pawn and then king our own pawn. Easily winning game at this point. I hope you enjoyed this. This is one of those reasons that learning how to move a knight and all the options for knights so that it becomes second nature is essential to being really good at chess. Until next time, this has been Sart. Thank you to chess.com as a sponsor for these videos. And if you want to play me at chess, head over to chess.com. Check out the other videos on my channel. Thank you.